It's just ridiculous. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't take a minute to note the death of the world's best-known evangelist, Reverend Billy Graham. He died on Wednesday. He was 99 years old, and he was responsible for an enormous amount. He was responsible for an enormous number of conversions. An enormous number of celebrities came to Christianity through Billy Graham. And Billy Graham was not. The media tried to portray him in many cases this sort of odd Elmer Gantry character. That's not who Billy Graham was. If you ever listened to any of Billy Graham's lectures, it was deeply not only religious stuff, but stuff about self-sacrifice and stuff about responsibility. Billy Graham had a great impact on the world. And this is why when people talk about how religion has had a nasty impact on the world, look at the followers of Billy Graham and ask how many followers of Billy Graham have made their lives better because they followed Billy Graham. There's in the aftermath of tragedy, there's an easy swing toward atheism, agnosticism, the idea that you'd be better off if you didn't believe in God. Better people don't believe in God. That somehow the world would be better if atheism were to rule the roost. We've heard this from thinkers I respect, including Sam Harris and Steven Pinker in the last couple of days. And this is not true for the vast majority of individuals around planet Earth. People who become atheistic are less likely to engage in communal activities. People who become atheistic are less likely to give to charity. People who become atheistic are less likely to engage in the sort of social fabric building that's necessary in order for a thriving society to survive. And that's not even a case for the veracity of Christianity or Judaism that I'm making. This is a case for the social utility of Christianity or Judaism. All the folks who are living in a free and open and good country can thank people like Billy Graham for turning the lives around of many people who would otherwise have led terrible lives. I mean, there are a lot of people who are hell-bent on leading bad lives, and Billy Graham was instrumental in preventing that from happening, as are so many other religious leaders. Now, that doesn't mean that religion is always a force for good. Of course not. It doesn't mean that religion always makes people better. That would be silly. It does mean that religion, when used properly, can be a solution to a lot of people's life problems, and it can be an encouragement to do better because there is someone who expects something more of you, and it's not just your friends or family, and it's not even just you. It's a higher power that expects you to make something of your life and discover a purpose. I think the death of God in American society has been a contributing factor to the sort of political fractiousness that we've seen here. We used to at least hold it in common, not only that we were all made in God's image, but that if we all held common values in common, we knew our neighbors cared about the dead kids in Sandy Hook or cared about the murdered children in Parkland. Right? We took that for granted because these were the same people that we saw at church every week. These were the same people who were giving to the same charities that we were. But because we've lost that communal space, it's a lot easier to sit in your house and go on Twitter or Facebook and malign people who you've never met because you've never met your neighbors. How many of us have actually met our neighbors? Now, in California, it's become really uncommon. I know that there are still places in the country where you know your neighbors, particularly in small town America. I grew up in Los Angeles. Knowing your neighbors was not a prereq. One of the things that you see when you drive through different areas of the country, it's really fascinating, is which areas have fences between yards and which don't. So if you go over to Dallas, for example, big city, but if you drive around suburban Dallas, there are no fences between the actual yards. And all the yards are basically connected. There may be some driveways, but they're not big fences. If you drive through the valley, which is where I've lived most of my life, you drive through the San Fernando Valley, what you'll see is that most of the yards are not connected. Most of the yards are separated by walls. Most of the yards are separated by fences. They're fenced off. There's nothing wrong with a wall. There's nothing wrong with a fence. But it is indicative of the fact that community is less common in big cities than it is in small towns, and it's less common in urban areas than it is in rural areas. And it's less common in non-religious areas than it is in religious areas. This is why you've seen in the last few years the rise in atheist get-togethers. They've been trying to create almost an atheistic religious get-together where you have community events and all the rest of this. And it hasn't been working because why should atheists get together? To talk about why God doesn't exist? That seems like a rather uninspiring vision of the world. Why would you get together with people who also don't believe God exists? That frees you to find any purpose in life, supposedly, but you're going to end up with a lot of different purposes, and a lot of those purposes are going to be working at cross purposes with one another. So Billy Graham's death is a reminder that building the social fabric is one of the chief roles of religion, particularly American religion. Billy Graham's life is pretty amazing. Every year since 1955, Graham was on Gallup's list of most admired men and women, according to Hank Berry and over at the Daily Wire. His fierce hatred of segregation meant churches had to integrate for his revivals as far back as 1953, when at a revival in Jackson, Mississippi, ushers set up ropes to segregate the races. Graham asked for the ropes to be removed. When the usher refused, Graham took them down himself and told all the people to sit where they wanted. At a Madison Square revival in 1957, he invited Martin Luther King to preach together. As King said, quote, "Had it not been for the ministry of my good friend Dr. Billy Graham, my work in the civil rights movement would not have been successful as it has been. Graham often paid the bail and fines that King received when he was in jail." Is again one of the lies about the civil rights movement. It was pushed by a bunch of atheists. It was pushed by a bunch of religious leaders. Dr. Martin Luther King was a reverend. Reverend Billy Graham was a reverend. He was born November 7th, 1918, the oldest of 4 children born to Morrow Coffey and William Franklin Graham Sr. He grew up on a dairy farm near Charlotte, North Carolina. As a child, he loved to read books. In 1933, his father forced him and his sister to drink beer until they got sick, which prompted both children to swear off alcohol and drugs for the rest of their lives. Children were raised differently back in 1933. The next year, having seen the evangelist Mordecai Ham, he was converted by him. He went to Bob Jones College in Tennessee, where he was almost expelled, but Jones told him, quote, "At best, all you could amount to would be a poor country Baptist preacher somewhere out in the sticks. You have a voice that pulls. God can use that voice of yours. He can use it mightily." And so Graham transferred to Florida Bible Institute. He preached his first sermon at Bostwick Baptist Church in 1937. He became a national figure in 1949 when he held a series of revivals in LA and had circus tents erected in the parking lot, which led to national media coverage. And he hosted TV, of course, from 1947 until 2005. It's worthwhile paying honor to a man who did a lot more good than he did bad in this world.